Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Photography session. My name is Tatiana, and I will be helping to moderate the session today. I would like to introduce John Silk, who will be leading the workshop today. John Silk started taking photos in a dark room when he was 12 and received his first Polaroid and instant camera, and he never looked back. He loves spending time in nature, and this is where he gets his inspiration. Professionally, John has been a wild photographer for the past 5 years, capturing the beauty of Oakville in all seasons. This workshop is presented as part of Oakvillegreen's new Green Connections program, which is aimed to reduce social isolation and build community connections among seniors in Oakville. Oakvillegreen Conservation Association is a not-for-profit organization founded in 2000 with a vision to create a living Oakville and a community that is connected to nature. Their programs cover three main areas of focus: advocacy, education, and tree planting and stewardship. The Green Connection program will offer nature-focused workshops and webinars, tree planting events, and nature walks this summer and fall. Visit oakvillegreen.org for more details. This section will be recorded. During the session, you will be muted. However, if you have a question, please input it into the chat and we will read out the question to John. We will start the program with the territorial acknowledgement. Oakville Public Library is located on Treaty Number 22 land and acknowledges that Oakville is home to many different Indigenous, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. We give thanks to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for their stewardship of the land, and we recognize the responsibility we have in protecting the land, water, air, animals, and plants that our library branches are located on. Now over to John, Melanie, and Tori.
Morning, everybody. My name is John Silk, and I'd like to welcome everybody. I'm so happy everybody can join today. I've been thinking a lot about what I want to say today, and when I teach photography, I love to start by talking about the benefits psychologically that help me with everyday stress and emotional health. There's a number of points that I'd like to cover. And first of all, there's a number. The number one thing for me in wildlife photography is the connection to the nature. That's the wildlife, the green space, the smells, the using all your senses while you're doing it. And for me, it saves my life because I'm usually without this. I think I'd be. I don't think I'd be the man I am today. And the benefits are maximized pretty quickly by getting outside. And and I always say, the number one camera you have is the one in your pocket, right here. And I use. Sorry, everybody. This is my camera for wildlife. However, I use this just as much. And when I'm teaching, I always tell my students that, before you buy a camera, what you need to do is figure out if you like it or not. A lot of people get into photography and they're like, oh, I want to be a photographer, but they may not enjoy it. So I always say that, don't go out and spend a lot of money. We want to learn about, we'll get into that later, about light, composition, and being able to, enjoy, the nature. It's not so much about the photograph take. It's more about the experience. For example, some of my best times in wildlife photography, I've missed the photographs. I've missed the shots, and I still have that memory that never goes away. And the psychological benefits from the stress relief. Studies show that it releases depression. There's been numerous studies, and I have a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist here in town. And if somebody comes in with maybe a mild bit of depression or anxiety, they would the prescription now is go out into green space and walk, and the stress relief, the vitamin D, helping with sleep, because being out in light increases your melatonin, therefore helping you sleep in the evening. And we all know about vitamin D, but furthermore, eyesight. We look at screens all day, and when I shoot or when I'm walking around, I keep my phone on silent, and I take in the nature, which is the connection. And now, it brings out my creativity. And it's interesting. There's a German study when they look at the color green, which is outdoors. They it triggers greater creativity than other colors. And I just wanted to introduce about a little about me. I shoot with my heart. I don't shoot with my head. I look at subjects, and if I don't have a spiritual connection with the subject, I have a very difficult time taking a photograph. Ansel Adams is my favorite photographer ever, and he's like the most important thing about photography is where you stand. You're going to find that you're going to develop an eye over time, and that takes time and patience. And I don't have a lot of that a lot of times. So I certainly really photography and wildlife photography has been a meditative experience for me, because I zone out. I basically start to meditate through my lens. And one of the most important things with wildlife photography, pardon me, is the speed of how you walk. I walk very gentle, very slowly. People I'm with, we don't make a lot of noise, and we absorb all the wildlife and the sounds and smells that are out there. Now, when I was growing up as a kid in Oakville, I remember being down at Optimus Creek, which is now called Bronny Petro Canada Park, and that was back in the early '80s. And there were shopping carts thrown into the shopping carts in the river, and it was a mess. And you wouldn't want to go in that water. And fast forward to now, you have yourself a little microclimate that's fascinating. A friend of mine did his PhD in biology, and he did it on Bronny Creek and the changes over time and the restoration. And if you look at the deer, I took that photograph about 6:30 in the morning last summer, and the light was coming down, and it was so peaceful because they were just looking at me, walking through the water. And I was fortunate enough, I was filming it because I make films as well. It was so peaceful and graceful to watch the deer, just being able to be there and observe, and relationships with your children, because I have a daughter, she's 15, and obviously she loves her Snapchat phone, and it goes away, and within an hour, she's a different person. It's fascinating to watch, because at the beginning it's screen, 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 it goes away, and that's the benefits for me, to watch a kid get rid of their phone and enjoy the wildlife, the nature, and absorb it. And the exercise. that is a fantastic thing for cardiovascular reasons. There's so many benefits to being outside that endless. Now, during COVID, I've been fortunate enough to have a job that I can be outside all the time, and I've noticed a little bit of changes over the last little while. Meaning, there's bald eagles in Bronte Creek, and which for me, I would have never imagined in my wildest dreams that a bald eagle's nest would be up the river in Bronte Creek. And I've often seen them flying over my house, which is, I never imagined that as well. So there's been a major conservation effort with restoration. And the eagles started off at the RBG, brought them back from basically extinction in Southern Ontario. So really it's the connection, and I love it. It's something that I get excited about. I love teaching it. I love doing it. And I love to present it to people and say, you know what, there's so much beauty out there. And, at the end of the day, after a long day at work, looking at a screen for 12 hours, it will improve your mood. I find that all the time. And, I started as a photographer very young, and then I went off to the business world for many years. And then about 10 years, Hello? Hello?
We can hear you, John. I don't know what happened. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I just saw a note saying that you wanted to talk to me. I wasn't sure.
I don't know.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. The basic tenets of psychology, and there's a number of papers about environmental psychology, and it's basically the human dependence on nature. I mean, we've evolved around, roads. We're just, basically a new thing. I've read studies about children that have never walked on a hill, and they've just been around cement. And when you get them off to a trail, they don't know how to walk. And, introducing children into this at a young age will help them in every facet of life. And, blood pressure, immune system, it creates a personal space with your friends, your family. And, we're adapters to change in society and the environment. And, we can, reshape identities and affiliations according to the physical space we live in. And, that's where my love comes for this, because it's not about the photograph, it's about the experience. Photograph is always secondary to me. And the connection with the subject is when the magic happens. So in saying that, maybe we'll get to the next slide. So here we have a bald eagle I photographed in Bronte Creek. And when I took that photograph, I was blown away, because I was like, what is that? And and I saw it, and then I found the nest. And it took us a couple of years to find the nest. And, it was just a joyous experience, having grown up in Oakville, to see the takeoff of wildlife between deer, eagles. But the eagles are really fragile, being at the top of the food chain. So the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about light and composition. So when I teach photography, I go, this is it. This is your camera. And don't go out and spend a lot of money, because there's no reason, because I use this. But I use this half the time. And the way this light hits the sensor in your phone can be done at any time. In fact, the cameras in the phones have a better low light sensor than my camera that I use for wildlife photography. So my point is, don't go out and spend a lot of money. Best camera you have is the one you have on your hands, and the light. What I do is when I'm shooting, best times to shoot for me, and it's not always a rule of thumb, but I love to do it the first 2-3 hours of the day and the last 2-3 hours of the day. So, you're going to get that golden light, that golden hour, they call it. That's the time of the day where it's very quiet and you'll get all the wildlife coming out, especially the birds first thing in the morning. It's quite remarkable. A lot of times I'll just sit in my backyard and listen and meditate, listening to that. And that for me is life saving. So light, you're always looking for light, and I mean the sun and shadows and highlights, and you'll be seeing trees, you'll see little pockets of light, and you want to take that photograph. Most importantly, when the light is good, and you'd be able to compose an image. And I always use there's a rule called the rule of thirds. And I'm not sure if anyone's interested has learned about that, but I'll keep it very simple. When you look at your phone, there's a grid. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now, a lot of people will put the subject right in the middle and, kind of makes it up. Now, what you want to do with say, for example, you see a fox walking in your backyard, or you see a coyote, or, a bird on your bird feeder, or something in your backyard, something simple. You want to be able to compose that, not in the middle, but on a grid, on the grid line. So the rule of thirds is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and you can certainly learn that easily. And what you do is you go to your settings in your phone and set up the grid. And when you take the photograph, make sure it's on one of those lines. Now, the rule of thirds is a photography term, but I break those rules all the time. But they're very simple to understand. And as you start to learn the process of wildlife photography, you start to find out that that is the perfect thing. I mean, the only thing in photography that is important is exposure, light, and composition, and that's it. And it can be done with a phone. Like I have a friend of mine. He has a $500 camera, a $200 lens, and he takes some of the best shots I've seen. And that's through his patience, his ability to understand the camera very well, and his patience. I don't have a lot of patience in my life, other than what I do. It's like go, 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 go. I produce and write, and when I'm out in the field is my meditation. And that's when the magic and the love happens. And you'll start to understand. I love the term magic light. That light that when you're outside and it's gold, people's faces, you take a photograph, everyone looks like they have a tan. It's that magic light they call. And I've been fascinated by it since I was a child. I remember for years I was a skier, and all I did was watch the Weather Network for years, and that kind of carried me over to my obsession with light. And a lot of times when people are teaching photography, they'll get all technical, and kind of I would zone out. I've been in photography school. They're going to teach you, and I have nothing against formal training in photography. However, to be a great photographer, you have to photograph all the time. And some of the best photographers I've seen around lately, especially young people, are using their phones. For example, my daughter, she is she's 50, and she doesn't even want to use a camera. She goes, "Dad, I already have a camera." And I'm like, "Well, why don't you use this?" She goes, "No, my cell phone's fine." And her images are beautiful, and it's based on the fact that she loves it too. So if you love it, the subject, you're always going to get a good photograph. But by following those rule of thirds, and if you want to write it down, rule of thirds, the best thing to do is go through Google and Google rule of thirds for beginners. Now that'll give you an idea of basic composition skills when it comes to a 35 millimeter lens or a 35 millimeter camera. And, but there's endless possibilities with photography. And, there is something about making a photograph, because I don't believe you take a photograph, you make one. And, the editing process can be done on your phone. It can be done on your computer. If you have a Mac, you can use the software on there. I often use that. If I just need a quick edit, done on my Mac. And then I'll move into Lightroom or other applications that are needed. But you really want to get that shot out of the camera. And, there's a certain amount of pleasure that comes with that as well. I'm really happy to be able to share this with everybody, because, my favorite part of being a photographer is teaching. Now, that's being able to teach anyone that is interested. And I'm so happy that everybody's joined this, because I get so excited about people that want to learn this art. And it's not like we need to go and buy film. We don't need to buy anything. We have the camera in our pocket. For example, like if I want to shoot a portrait, sometimes my portraits look better in the portrait mode on my iPhone. And, compared to a $2,000 lens, and it looks better. And it's based on artificial intelligence. It's not the same. However, you get the same effect. You get the blurred background. It looks like a shallow depth of field. And the next slide, we're going to get into that. So if we can move on to the next slide, that'd be wonderful. So, wildlife photography. Boy, that kingfisher looks blue. Now, this is the key to photography. Now, in your phone, you can put it in manual mode. You can learn the exposure triangle by the settings in your phone. So you can basically shoot with your phone, like I shoot in my big mirrorless camera, and then learn all that while you're not spending a lot of money. Now, it's called the exposure triangle, and that's something that you can easily Google and read a little bit about it. But I'll give you a little brief understanding what it is. So, first is your shutter speed. That's how much light is coming in. So what happens is, and that photography is light. So the shutter speed is, so if you have 1/10 over a second, it'd be like this. 1/2000th of a second is how you shoot wildlife, up to 1/4000th of a second for a moving subject, a fast subject. For example, a cardinal going extremely fast. But an eagle, you would bring it down to 1/500th of a second. Now that's shutter speed. Now that's something that's part of this exposure triangle. And now you have ISO. And ISO is, if you remember the film days, there is, it used to be 100, 200, 400, 800. And that was really it. So you had a lot of limitations on what you could do. Now you can shoot, 100, like my camera goes 100 to 32,000. Now, it won't produce a great photograph. However, you can still take a picture, even in the middle of the night. And so your ISO is the light sensitivity on the sensor. Now, your aperture, which is part of the exposure. So you think of the exposure triangle, it is a triangle. And then in the middle, you have exposure. And aperture, or your f-stop, and that's how it's on the camera. So if you have it's, for example, if you have your f-stop's measured at 1.8, or it can start at 1.2 to go to 1.4, 1.8, 2.8, 3.1, and as you move up, and it's called stopping down, so it's a bit of an opposite. So what you're doing is your aperture ring is like an eye, and as it gets smaller, it decreases the amount of light coming in to your camera. So aperture means, like, so for example, if you ever seen a photograph and there's a lot of blur in the background, and that would be an aperture about f1.8 to f2.8 to f4. And when I shoot portraits, I shoot a lot of portraits. I work professionally shooting portrait photography and landscape photography. And but that's not what we're talking about today. But the aperture, so it would start off at 1.8 and go to f22. So f22 would be about that, very, very tiny, where the lens would be open like that at 1.2 down to f22 like that. So that's kind of an understanding I'd like to share like that. However, if you want to learn more, just Google exposure triangle, and there's a ton of simple explanations out there that are simple, because you want to keep this as simple as possible. And if you have a camera, don't go to auto mode. You want to start to learn from the beginning how to use a camera in manual mode. No different than film, because the only way you're going to get perfect exposure is in manual mode. Aperture priority, the A button on your phone, is the easier way to do it, because you control your f-stop, which is the aperture, and the camera looks after the shutter speed. So it simplifies things, and you still be able to get that, the photograph that has a shallow depth of field, meaning blur, or a large depth of field, which means the whole image is in focus. So that, in an essence, is the exposure triangle. And so we're at 11:30, and I kind of wanted to do a lot of questions and answers. I know we left 15 minutes for questions and answers, but I might and I will get into. We'll spend about 10 more minutes on my wildlife photography experience, and what I found. I remember I first started when I was first photograph I ever took I was about 16, in the backyard in the snow, set up a tripod with an old Minolta camera and a 135 lens, and I sat there and I waited for a cardinal to come. And when the cardinal came onto the bird feeder, I took a photograph, and I couldn't believe it. It was magic right then. And the fact of the matter is, I've never looked back since then. I've certainly taken a lot of breaks from photography, from business or what have you, but the last 10 years have been that's all I've been doing, and along with producing and other art forms. And all art forms are very similar for me. The composition similar to music, composition similar to painting. It runs the whole gamut, and like the best example I can give of Oakville is the deer population. You go down to, if you want to take a walk down to Bronny Petro-Canada Park, go early, or go in at dusk, because if you know anything about the park, there's a soccer field, and which used to be a soccer field, and the deer will come out because they want to drink some water at the time, and they'll come out, and I film them, and they look like horses as they're running around, and you'll see 4 or 5 at any given time. And always look up, because there's bald eagles in Oakville, which still blows my mind. Now, as far as safety, I always teach this too. You always want to wear pants and long sleeve shirts. I've had a lot of friends, wildlife photographers, that have had ticks, and you don't even want to have one of those on your body. Now, what I do is I'll wear my hiking boots, I'll wear a heavy pair of socks, and I'll tuck my socks into the boots. And that, therefore, nothing gets in. And I'll also wear a hat that tries to cover my neck and my shirt up. Now that'll prevent that too. But if I'm shooting with guys, and also when you're done, shake your hair, because a lot of times the ticks will get in your hair. So that is something that I'm very, very weary of as well, because they're in there, and it's only getting worse with climate change, because they're staying and they can live through the winter. And there's a certain tick that is quite, I think it's called the black. Anyway, it's a black tick, and it's dangerous. So, if you're going to be doing wildlife photography, be careful. And furthermore, and I had to learn the hard way. I was shooting landscapes in February, and I slipped in the water, and it was probably the scariest experience I ever had, because when you get involved in it, you're so zoned out on everything. Sometimes you don't remember what you're around. And there's a lot of photographers that have been killed by death by misadventure, because they're not looking what's behind them or in front of them. So you always want to be aware of your surroundings. Now, okay, where was I? So bug spray, pants, what else? Sunscreen, obviously, but it's something that you really. And then when you're done, if you're with somebody, you want to be able to check everything in your body to make sure that ticks aren't there, because there's a lot in Oakville, and you have to be careful. So, like, I have a friend of mine at RBG who actually taught me all about this, and she's covered head to toe all the time, because it's very easy to get that. And when kids run off into the woods, always make sure that you check their legs and everything before you go home. And if you do get exposed to tick, then what you need to do is go to the doctor right away and get prescribed antibiotics immediately, because it'll minimize your risk. And but the surroundings, make sure you know exactly where your surroundings are, because it can get dangerous once you're zoned out into a photograph. And if you're around water, that's even more dangerous. So always have the awareness to think, where am I? And I'm going to get my photograph, but always kind of safety first. And like I said, I learned everything the hard way, and that's one thing that I always teach at the very beginning is watch your surroundings and be careful. And there's certain there's a lot of tricks, but the biggest thing is, I once had a guy tell me, he goes, "John, your first thousands of pictures, they're going to be terrible, but then they're going to improve over time." And I look back at my images 5 years ago, and they're completely different than they are now. So you're growing as a photographer, and as you grow, you start to develop an eye. Now, an eye takes quite a while to learn one, and a lot of people have a natural eye, but not everybody. But that's what I meant about the grid, because the grid, you can put the subject on the grid and be able to compose it like that, rather than, and the space in between the subject and the frame is called negative space. And you want negative space so for example, a bird, if you look at the kingfisher here, they're boy, it looks really blue. Anyway, it looks like it's ready to take off. But if I had to put that in the middle, it would be just a bird on a tree, which is not very interesting to look at. So always kind of little to the left, little to the right, and that helps even when you're taking pictures of your kids, your family. Always make sure that you're using that grid and being able to use the rule of thirds to certainly to make a photograph. So we're at 11:40, and I'd love to have 20 minutes for questions and answers because I see a lot of questions already. And I was wondering if we could perhaps open up to that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, we do have quite a few questions, and probably it will strike another conversation.
Sure, and I have all the time in the world. So, and I'm going to give my email out to everybody. So if you have more questions, I'll be able to just send you a quick note. And I know you guys, which Oakville Green is probably the best organization I've been involved with. The people are wonderful. Their causes are what this town needs immediately, because development in this town is ruining the environment, and there's ways of developing without destroying. And obviously, people need to live places. However, cutting down 150-year-old trees isn't the way to do it. That's my opinion, and I know it's Oakville Green's opinion, and I know every conservationist, environmentalist is their opinion. And so let's get started with questions. What do you guys think?
All right.
I don't know if I ring or not. So,
what is the preferred lens for nature photography?
I use a 600 millimeter with a 1.4 teleconverter, so that makes it 900 millimeters. So that's pretty far. But I know guys that shoot wide angle. I love wide angle wildlife photography because what you're doing is you're building a landscape and a subject like a bird. So you look at it with the composition skills with the rule of thirds, and you put that subject. So for example, you have a tree this home like that and a bird like that. I have a photograph here. I'll show you guys quickly. I was up north. I was in Quebec. I just got back last night, and we were shooting eagles. We were having a ball. We were swimming. And where is it? So if you look at this photograph, I don't know if anyone can see it.
Yeah.
So look at the bottom. There's a hummingbird.
If you can move it to the right. Yeah, right there.
Okay. So if you look at that, the composition is the tree. And then you'll have the subject right down at the bottom. That's a hummingbird. So it kind of builds a composition that's not so much, sometimes you see a bird and that's it. I like to see a composition behind them. So when I'm teaching, like, for example, if you look what's around you, you compose the bird and the landscape exactly at the same time. And that takes practice. So best lens you have is the one you have. But, for someone who's starting out and that wants to buy a camera, there's so many good bridge cameras that are kind of in between a phone and a big DSLR. I use mirrorless. I shoot Sony. I've always shot Sony. However, Nikon, Canon, anything, they're all the same. It doesn't matter. It is the person behind it. And most cameras people are selling, it's all smoke and mirrors. And, but if you learn the exposure triangle, lenses are so sharp. And for the last 80 years, they've been produced to a point where they're flawless. So, like the optics in the lenses will get you a good photograph. So one thing I always advise is buy one of those little Joby tripods that clamp your camera like that. And therefore, it doesn't move. And if you want to shoot landscape or whatever, you're never going to get a shake. And your images will be much sharper. And you can pick one up off Amazon for $10. So you want to keep your costs down. But, I always say, find something used or, like Canon Rebel or something about $300-400. See if you like it or not. And then you can go to $100,000 on a camera. So, the lens. I guess for me, my sweet spot would be between 300 and 600. So a 300 millimeter lens, which generally it's like a 70 to 300. The prime lenses, which are just 300, are very expensive, but you can get just as much depth with a cheaper lens than you can with a very expensive lens. So I always tell people, it's not the gear. It is not the gear. It's no different than a guitar player that can pick up an old guitar, tune it, and it sounds like Willie Nelson. So there's a certain amount of sales pitch behind gear. So, but I mean, I get bought into it a lot too. So I mean, I understand. But yeah, lenses, it's kind of a personal preference.
Okay, we have a question from Debbie. I have about 40,000 photos on my camera. I take pics outside of everything. Love flowers, Florida, trees, wildlife as well. Any tips on where to go in Oakville area?
That's a great question because it's interesting because all the green spaces that have been developed around the new developments in Glen Abbey and all that, they built, the water systems in there. And you'll find ponds. In the ponds, you're going to find green herons, blue herons, right snuck away around your home. I would suggest going to 16 Mile Creek. I would suggest going to Lions Valley. My home turf is Bronny Creek. That's the one I know often. I spent my life fishing in there and now photographing in there. So, that's where I know the best. I don't shoot a lot of those other places, but I have friends that do. There's osprey in 16 Mile Creek. There's a nest there. And, the best way to do it is be very quiet. And, when you're hiking with somebody and doing that, just absorb the everything. It's not about the picture. It's about the experience. And we have it all here. We might not feel like we do because I go shoot in a lot of places and I'm the only one there. And I'm like, where is everybody? Because I have a lot of friends in Sweden and Europe and they come over here and they're like, where is everybody? It's a beautiful day, maybe in February. They're like, okay, we don't seem to utilize our green spaces the way that Europeans do, or anyone around the country. I find so many people new to the country coming from a war-torn country, and they're refugees, and they walk around here in awe. And when I see that, it's the most joyful thing because they're looking at such beauty and coming from such a place of pain, and they're so grateful just to look at what we have. And I find not that we take it for granted, but it's just always been there. So for me, it's all about when I see people getting really interested, because when you're in you're going to start thinking about, okay, how can I help fix all this? Like, you start to build a different perspective rather than, we all live these busy lives. We go train, we're, in an office, not so much now, but, but when you get outdoors, put your phone on silent and enjoy it. 40,000 shots. That's a lot of pics.
We have a question. Sorry.
So those are my tips on the Oakville area. Even behind the hospital is really good.
Thank you. Is there a certain type of weather that gives better light for landscape wild photography? Additionally, are animals more likely to be out and about in certain types of weather? This question is from Natalie.
Sure. Natalie, the best time is early. When you hear the chirping, they're out. And if you have a backyard, or if you have friends with a backyard, or if you're in, if you're living in wherever, there's always, there's really no one specific time. To get the light I want to make a photograph, I want perfect light. And but that's when I do this professionally, I want everything to be perfect. But it doesn't have to at all. So the best time is when you have time. And if you like getting up early, go then. If you don't, go in the evening. Get off work, go. Get down to the river, get down to the creek, go for a hike, bring your cell phone, buy a camera. That's my best advice. But you want that nice light. That's my best advice. But there is no real best time of day. Like I've taken shots at noon and in high light. I'm like, whoa, that was a good shot. And so there is no really specific time, but my preferences are those 2-3 hours between sunset and sunrise.
And what about the weather?
I don't shoot in rain. Once in a while, I'll put a cover over my camera and I'll do that. Overcast days are good. Then on overcast days, you want to get a little more light. So shooting all day is pretty good on those days. I prefer a sunny day with a little bit of clouds. So you get that light coming through the clouds and creating more shadows and highlights. So that's kind of my experience.
Natalie is asking, do you have recommendations for beginner-friendly editing software for videos and photos?
Of course. On a Mac, it's your Photos app. And what you do, for example, so this image, I just hit, can you see?
Right, yeah, right, turn right a little bit, yeah, and up.
Edit. Okay, so there's an edit software right in your phone. So you go at this, hit that, and if you want to just bring up the exposure or down, bring down the brilliance, highlights, shadows, brightness, up, down, saturation, making color, and warmth, that's your white balance. Your tint, definition, and you can even put a vignette on it, a vignette. I use Lightroom. I don't use Photoshop. Lightroom is an Adobe product, and it costs about $10 a month on your phone. And I use it on my iPad. I'll edit on a 27-inch screen for video and movies and music and all that thing. But if I'm just editing a photograph, it's on my iPad.
We have a question from Sydney. How do your methods of photography differ from the warmer months to the winter months? Thank you so much for your time.
Clothing. Number one thing, dress for it. I remember I was up north and I was trying to get a photograph of a pileated woodpecker. The big woody woodpecker ones. And I stood outside for 4 hours in front of a tree and I had wet feet. And by the end of that, I was so miserable. So what you want to do is dress for the weather. And you can do it all year. The migration of birds are so much interesting to watch. And I'll give everybody a really good app to I work with a little bit with Cornell University in the U.S., which have an ornithology department, which is the best in the world. Now, which ornithology study of birds. And there's an app called Merlin, Merlin. And you can basically look at the bird and it'll tell you what it is. So for kids, for anyone that wants to learn about that, download that app. It's free. And you'll be able to find out what it is. Because in the wintertime, you're going to find chickadees, you're going to find cardinals, you're going to find blue jays, native species to Canada that never leave. They don't migrate. And then you'll have in the spring, you'll start to find orioles coming into the backyard. And if you want to attract orioles, put in some oranges, an orange saucer, where you can put some grape jelly. Make sure it's Welch's. that doesn't matter. But you know, it's and over time they'll start coming. Hummingbird will start coming. But I prefer best time for me. I love the winter, like bald eagles photographing, because not only that, there's not as many trees, no leaves on them, so you're going to see more wildlife. So I would all seasons for me are just as good. Summer months when it's humid and hot, I don't shoot. It's too hot. It's just, but that's a personal preference, you know. But if it's 35 degrees out, or minus 20, but if it's like -5, because the gear is sensitive to cold weather. You know, I mean, my camera's probably good to -10, and then your batteries drain very quickly in cold weather. So if you're going to go shoot in cold weather, make sure you bring a couple batteries with you. But the phones, they're fine. Keep them in your jacket. So there's no real good time to shoot all year.
We have a question from David. What's a good camera for bird watching?
A good camera for bird watching, or a good bird watch, like binoculars are great. Actually, that's one thing I wanted to add in. If you bring your phone, get yourself a pair of binoculars too, because you can build compositions with those and then apply it. So what was the exact case? There was a bit of a confusing question.
David, you can unmute yourself and...
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah. David, can you hear us?
Yeah, I just...
Hi, David.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, I just connected to it. Yeah, I was asking about what type of camera, like give you like greater zoom so that you can like see birds very clearly.
I use Sony. So I have a Sony A7R4. I have an A9 II. And I use lenses that are all Sony lenses. But Canon, same thing. So you want a focal length that is long. For example, 400 to 600, 300 to 600, and you know you don't have to spend a lot of money to get into it, because you know I'm like, well, are you going to be a pro, or are you just doing this for fun? You know, so you know, but if you have the money or you don't, you can do it. So for me, I would say. And David, you know what? If you want to send me an email about that, I'd be happy to respond. Maybe send you a little bit, a couple of information. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
We have a quick question from David, technical question. How high should your tripod be sitting and waiting for the deer?
I shoot from the hip. So I'm like this. Most people are up here. I'm down here. I want to be low. So it's a different perspective, because when everyone's looking at, say, I always say, like, okay, so your perspective is about 5'10" to 6'1". I want to be 3 feet. So that can depend on where I am. But if I'm shooting anything, I'm always laying down. When I shoot wildlife, I want to lay down on the ground, flat on my front, and with the camera in front of me, sometimes behind a blind, to get the photograph so you don't see me. But you know, that's a real personal preference. But I would advise, like, don't, like, if you're going to take any picture, don't shoot it like this and standing up straight. Don't ever do that. Just get down a bit, down, you know, up, you know, bring it up a bit, you know, kind of play around, take a few shots that way, this way, you know, light going this way, light going that way. So it doesn't have to be. There's no rule on that. But I like to have a different perspective than what you see through the eye. So it's like if I take a photograph, I want to show something unique. That answer your question?
Thank you. And I just want to point everyone's attention at the chat. John kindly provided his email. You can connect with him and ask your questions. Also, we do have a feedback survey, and if you would kindly fill the forms for us, we also will gladly appreciate. And I want to thank John and Oakville Green for this tremendous workshop. We all, I hope, learned a lot and had a great time. Thank you
Well,
so much.
I really hope we can do this live one day, like together.
And soon.
Outdoors and outdoor work. That's the best. So, let's I hope have a great day, everyone.
And have a great summer, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.